everything exists in the now moment. And so when we experience the past, or we experience our hopes and dreams for the future, we're always doing so in the now moment. We are imagining or thinking about a past event that we've had, or a future event that we want to have. And so how can we use this mechanism in order to aid our transformation? And this is especially useful if you're somebody who keeps bobbing back and forth between identities. So an identity, as I've said before, is simply a viewpoint that consciousness is looking at itself through. And whichever viewpoint we're looking through has different thoughts, feelings, emotions, ideas, conditioning, programming, etc. And it will experience reality as per that viewpoint, because physical reality is just a feedback loop. It's a mirror, and it's the consciousness, the awareness moving through the identity that is creating that experience. And so when we're bobbing back and forth between identities, maybe we feel like we've shifted and then something triggers us and we bounce back and then we start again, and ping pong, ping pong, ping pong. It's worth using this ability to time travel in the present moment to revisit some of the painful memories that are keeping us anchored to the viewpoint that we want to move from. These anchors are experiences that our current identity has had and have made an imprint on us. So they are either emotionally intense or emotionally impactful, or they were continually repeated. So if we've grown up in an environment with not a lot of money, it's a continual repetition of that environment, of those thoughts, feelings and experiences that come with growing up with not enough money. And so it imprints us. And these imprints create an anchor. They create density. They stop the light of source consciousness moving through us. And so they keep us tethered to the identity that we want to move from. And it is usually these that are creating our ping-ponging effect. Now, to revisit these anchors is to basically pull them to the surface and look at them. Look at them with awareness and attention in order to change our perception of those memories, of those painful experiences. Because all of our memories are subjective. And we never remember a memory exactly as it is. We're either embellishing it or distorting it in some way or another. Every time we revisit a memory, there's a slight variation on the memory that we are experiencing. And so we don't need to go looking for these anchors. They will come find us. We don't need to create some archaeological investigation and seek out every single limiting belief, conditioning or programming we have. They come to us, they show up. And so we experience them when we experience negative emotions, or we have that sensation of, oh, I'm back here again. Why am I back here again? It's because these painful experiences are anchoring us. And they come with emotions like fear, anger, impatience, procrastination, overthinking, any habitual behavior that is not conducive to your development, like overeating, overdrinking, gambling, all of the things. These are symptoms of the anchor that is holding us to our identity. And the symptoms themselves are protective mechanisms that are trying to distract us from looking at the pain that we don't want to look at, because it's painful to look at painful things, right? And so to revisit a memory is to use your focus and attention in a relaxed meditative state to access other viewpoints of source consciousness in order that you can release them, in order that you can sever the anchor from your vessel so you can sail on your way to the identity and the viewpoint that you prefer to look through. Because when we speak on transformation and we speak on self-concept, we speak mostly on focusing on the version of yourself that you want to be and behaving as it as it until you are it, or feeling into the state, or living in the end, or whatever the case may be. And while this is sound advice, it can be helpful to revisit the things that are keeping us anchored and keep us flip-flopping back to an identity we don't want to be inhabiting anymore. So they'll come up, an emotion will arise, and so we'll be aware that something is holding us to this identity. There's an attachment there, and we can move into a relaxed state, into a meditative state, and essentially time travel back to that memory so that we can alter it, so that we can stop it from tethering us to the identity that we're trying to move from. And it's probably easier to give you an example. This is actually something that happened to me a month or so ago. So I've moved through a lot of fear of being seen by starting this YouTube channel and turning what has basically been an obsession for 20 years into a practice of recording videos. And a lot of that was regulating my nervous system to show it that it could survive after recording and posting. And then I would get into a flow, and then I would bob out of the flow. And so I was aware that there was this avoidance and also this level of frustration. Why can I sometimes sit in front of the camera with no problems at all and just speak what I need to speak, and other times it feels like wading through treacle? So there was annoyance and there was frustration. And so when this arose the last time, I put myself into a meditative state, was just focus on my breath until I was in that really relaxed, peaceful state where there's no thoughts and my sense perception had moved inwards. And I asked myself, when I say myself, I mean source consciousness, the awareness that I am at my core, infinite intelligence, higher power, however you want to call it. I asked, show me why and where this pain is. What is creating this avoidance and frustration? And immediately I felt grief in my chest. So this sense of loss, this sense of not having, right? This is what grief is, this sense of not having. And I started to cry. And then I was essentially shown a different catalogue of images. So there were a number of different images with different people involved, but there was a prevalent core set of images that involved a high school teacher that I used to have. And so the first one was GCSE coursework, handing that in, and this teacher marking me a B. And I had put so much effort and energy into this coursework, like I had devoted myself to this coursework. The second one was the image of being in class and another student saying to this teacher, why did you give Helen a B when you give Helen's friend an A, and Helen's friend only ever copies Helen's work anyway? The third one was being at parents' evening, and this teacher kept referring to me or speaking directly to me, calling me by this friend's name who had always copied my work. And there was a fourth one. Oh, it was sitting in the classroom near the end of school, and I had said something about going to university, and he basically scoffed at me and sort of mocked me. He said something like, you know, you're going to university, as if like absolute disbelief, like you can't manage that, or that's not possible for you, which is kind of wild. Highly possible. I've been twice. And so the general feeling of these images that were given to me was your efforts and your intelligence are not seen and not acknowledged. They're not for you, they're for other people. So other people being this friend, for example, right? Now, once those images had stopped rolling and I had that general sense of what they were about, I don't have the intelligence and I don't have the right to be seen, essentially, so that I don't have that grief, right? continued to breathe, so was just in quietude for a moment, and then the intention was to revisit, to take my consciousness to that time and space with my current self, with 2 instructions. The first instruction being, forgive them for they know not what they do. And the second instruction being, give yourself what you are. And so I took my 42-year-old self into the classroom with my 15-year-old self and this high school teacher. Forgive them for they know not what they do. Our natural state is the same state as source consciousness, is our God state, right? Peace, love, harmony, joy, abundance, etc. When we're not moving from that state, we're moving from an egoic pattern, a pattern we have identified ourselves with. And so with this in mind, I listened to the teacher tell me this point of view. I'm sorry that I did these things. I was not moving from my best self. I had other stuff going on. I was not moving from my natural state, from my source consciousness state. And he was telling this to the 15-year-old version of me. And there was a true recognition that we all do that, right? Every single one of us moves from states of being that are not our essence source consciousness state. So there's then this arising of forgiveness. There's also this element of source consciousness does not see us as anything other than whole and complete and unconditionally loved and unconditionally loving. So whatever we experience from our egoic state is a distortion of reality. That's why so many people call reality an illusion, or the veil, or what's the current one? Simulation, etc. So if I were to see this as source consciousness sees this, it wouldn't be the ego of my 15-year-old self interacting with the ego of the teacher self. It would be as God would see it. So supportive, loving, kind, etc. So that was the kind of energy of that first part of my mediation, if you like. And then the second instruction, give yourself what you need. Sorry, give yourself what you are. I mean, same thing, really. What you are is source consciousness, the unconditional love. And so what you didn't receive in that moment, because of an egoic state of somebody else and an egoic state of you who received it, is not what you actually are. And what you actually are is love. And can you give yourself the thing that you needed in that moment from that loving place? And so in practical terms, I reminded my 15-year-old self of other contradictory information to her perspective at that time. So for example, this very same high school teacher at some other point had said to the 15-year-old me, you should teach this class on such and such because you understand it way better than me. I continued to give her examples of where her intelligence had been met and her insight or advice was given to somebody else and helped in some way, was of service of some way. So you give that egoic, distorted perspective a different perspective. And then there was a couple of other examples that I had. And with that, I then also gave forgiveness to my 15-year-old self for having carried this distorted perspective for so long. Because again, forgiveness is a virtue of source consciousness, right? It is part of our natural state. That's why most of the time when people argue, they apologize because our natural state is forgiveness, even though from an egoic sense it's again distorted. Anyway, I digress. I forgave my 15-year-old self. I hugged them both and they both hugged each other. And there was this sense of just compassion and love and forgiveness. I ended the scene and came back to my body which instantly felt lighter. Like it literally felt like an anchor had been removed from my being. And if I remember rightly, I then recorded a video. I can't remember. But this is essentially the practice of revisiting painful memories with the aid of our awareness in order to look at them how source consciousness or God looks at them. Look at them through the viewpoint of love, forgiveness, and compassion. To give yourself and to also give the other person what they need. Because the school teacher who was being a douche, that's not his highest calling, right? That nobody wants to be a douche. So we have hundreds of these anchors, right? If we didn't, we would literally be aware that we are source consciousness at every minute of every day and walk around like a glowing ball of golden light, touching everything with grace and brilliance. So we have hundreds of them, but you don't need to go in and revisit every single anchor that you have, because the way we operate, the way everything operates, is resonance and association. And so the one that came up for me, the one that had the most scenes attached to it, was the most pertinent one to look at. And it may be that you revisit something and you feel that release, and the anchor that you have drawn up has brought a whole load of debris with it. So you don't need to look at these individual associated memories or experiences. But it may also be the case that you revisit one of these things, you clear the anchor, so to speak, and then a couple of days or a week or so later, something related, associated, does want you to go back and look at it. So the past only exists as a present moment experience. Every time we revisit a memory, we're doing so in the here and now, which means we can revisit it from a different state. We don't have to return to it as the same version of ourselves who first experienced it. We can return to it with increased awareness, and we can bring to it more love, more compassion, more understanding. And sometimes just doing this is what lifts the anchor that has been holding us down.